I just wanted to sort of give you a bit of an overview about the way I used Phaser and how it kind of was built into the development process of the game. And it's not going to be a technical talk, so I don't want to overlap too much with Richard's talk. But it should give you like a bit of an idea. It's kind of a case study, I suppose, and a bit of a post-mortem in a way, of just the way I did things. So a bit of a breakdown about specifically what it's about. I was going to talk about game jams, because the prototype was made during a game jam, and I just think they're quite a good way of coming up with ideas and a good way to start a game, a great way to kind of like boost the prototype and get that into a production game. And then kind of specifically about how I used Phaser for the prototyping during the game jam. Some of the tools I used, because I just think it's quite useful to know what people are using. So I was going to suggest some of the things I used for prototype. And yeah, as I said, less technical, it's more of a general overview. So GB Jam was the game jam that I did for this game that I was working on. And if you don't know what a game jam is, I'm sure quite a few probably do. It's just a kind of an event where you try and make a game, usually themed, or there's some sort of constraint, and you're trying to make it in a short period of time, either on your own or with other people. So it can be quite a bit of fun, and it's a good way to kind of spark new ideas. So, GB Jam specifically is kind of, the theme is you're trying to make a Game Boy game. And the one I did was over 9 days, so it's quite a long one. Normally it's a bit shorter, game jams. So all the assets have to be made during the jam, so art, sound, code. And then there's a couple of more difficult constraints, and this is where things got a bit more interesting, is that you had to use the Game Boy screen resolution, 160 by 144, which isn't a lot of space, it's pretty small. You kind of see that, so I picked some GIFs out. These are just some of, the top one was from a recent GB Jam, and the other one was from a while back. I think it's called Cuckoo Castle. But they're just particularly good ones. But you can see there's not much space to work with there, so you've got to be pretty clever about how you use the space on the screen. And then the other constraint is a 4-color palette. So again, and I'm not an artist, so I was my skill set's programming. So I was doing the artwork myself, and you know, when you're trying to figure out how to use 4 colors effectively to show what you want on screens, it's quite tricky. So these are just some interesting constraints for this jam. So I started the prototype for GB Jam, and I'll just give you an idea, because when I did this, I was actually away. I was in Wales in a little cottage, and I had hardly any internet, and I was using this laptop, which is pretty old, so I couldn't really run much on it, and I just wanted a lightweight solution, and that's kind of why I went down this route. And so I just thought to talk about some of the game jam positives. I talked about a few of them already, but the constraints tend to give birth to better ideas. You know, if you're trying to come up with a game idea and you've just got kind of endless possibility, you know, it could be anything. Sometimes it's difficult to kind of narrow in on something, but if you kind of like self-impose some of these constraints, by maybe doing a game jam, you'd be surprised how much it can improve your game design, because it kind of focuses you. You sort of pinpoint on things because you've got a theme or specific constraints. And I mean, there's quite a few games that have come out of that. I think there's a recent one, I can't remember the name of it, but it's set on a ship, and the developer self-imposed a kind of 2-bit art style. So it looks like nothing else, so it's quite interesting. It's a good way to kind of come up with new ideas. I didn't work in a team at the time because I was in Wales, but if you know, game jams in general, if you're working in a team, it's great for improving teamwork, especially if you're working with people you don't know what their skill set is. You usually have to kind of like work out how to work best together. It's an opportunity to try new tools. I always kind of like, if I'm doing a game jam, I tend to pick out a few things, a few tools, or a language that maybe I haven't got much experience in, and try to use that as a way of kind of like finding a purpose to give it a good try. And if it works out, I might use that in the future. I think this is kind of an interesting one. So you could prevent prototype code from becoming production code. And again, kind of, this comes from if you do have to use a different language. You know, you'll hastily put together kind of prototype when you're doing this game jam over a period of days or a few hours even. You can stop that becoming, if you ever decide to take it to a full game, it's quite a good way of kind of stopping you from using your jumbled together stuff in production if you're feeling lazy. So using a different language is quite a good way of preventing that. and you can write it using your chosen language from scratch better. And then getting feedback. I think this is quite good as well, because especially with game, well, GB Jam definitely, but with a lot of game jams, normally you can upload it. So you're going to get people to critique your game. They're going to give you feedback. It might be good, might be bad, but it's going to be something interesting, and you can take that away, and it'll improve your ability to make games. So that's just a few positives I think about game jams in particular. And then I just thought to talk about the tools I use, because I always find it interesting to know what people are using. So I use Phaser, obviously, for the game framework. I had used it before for a few other things, so I knew I was kind of comfortable with it. So I picked that because it made sense to me. And as I say, I wanted something lightweight at the time because I didn't have a very powerful machine, and it just worked really well. So I used that. I used Asana for my text editor. Brunch, if anyone's familiar with it, it's a pretty good like build pipeline, automated build pipeline. It's kind of, if anyone's used Grunt, kind of similar thing, but I guess a little bit simpler. So it's quite good to use, but it sped things up for me because it would also compile the code, and I could just also reload and continue to kind of iterate. And then for art and audio, I use some unusual image editors, or I think they're unusual. So I use Pixen, which is an OS X image editor, which is probably no one's ever heard of it, but it's quite good. I thought, again, I was trying things out, so I tried this out. And then Sprite, or Acid Sprite, which is pretty good actually. It's kind of like very focused on pixel art. I was making a pixel art game. It's got a very good animation timeline. So if anyone's ever worked on like a pixel art game, I recommend Sprite because it is particularly good for doing animation. And it exports the sprite sheets, so I was really happy. And then CFXR, so this is for the sound. And there's a Windows equivalent, so I was working on OS X, but I believe it's called SFXR. So the Windows equivalent, it's just a procedural audio generator. So it has a few different waves, sine waves, square waves, and you can change parameters or randomize them to get procedural sound. So it's really handy, if you're doing a game jam and you want to put sound in, and you want to make it the assets as part of the jam. This is the way to do it. So those are just the main tools I used. And then I used probably a slightly unusual combination of Phaser and CoffeeScript. I don't know if other people are doing this, but I found CoffeeScript to be quite fast for prototyping because the syntax kind of requires less code to be written, and it worked out of the box with Phaser as well. So I found this pretty useful in combination with Brunch, where I had a module that was compiling the CoffeeScript to JavaScript. So I could make a change in code, and it would compile it straight to JS. I could run it in the browser. So it let me work really, really quick. So I kind of put together it's sort of a time lapse of like I just picked out a few of my commits over when I was just iterating to kind of figure out what I wanted this game to be. I had a rough idea in my mind, which you kind of see from the beginning, and then it evolved really quickly. But the key thing is, this happened very, very fast just because I was able to iterate so quickly. I didn't have to like constantly recompile loads of code. I didn't have to, because I wasn't working natively. Hopefully this will play, or not. There we go, okay. So really early on, I don't think I'd even sorted out the sort of nearest neighbour interpolation for pixel art yet, so I did that. And then slight improvement, I hadn't sorted out the font yet. And I decided that you could pick up 3 blocks and move them around and sort out the font. And then you can see, now I've kind of figured things out a little bit. So you can move 1 block, and then there's some that you can't move. Please. I think I did a second level, so it's starting to come together a bit. You can see the game forming. And now you've got a new block type, so this one's affected by gravity. The other ones sort of stick in the air, so now I've got more complex puzzles and a few more tools to play with in this game. So you can see here it goes sticks in the air. So it's starting to come together, and then the levels got gradually more sophisticated because it was so quick for me to just add a behaviour, add these block behaviours, and then try out different levels, try out different things. Started to get some pretty fun puzzles going. So this was was, I mean, I did it over a few days, but the time I actually spent on it was probably only like a few hours, really. So yeah, at this point, I've kind of really figured out what I'm doing in terms of how the puzzles can work, and this one's much more sophisticated. Several stages to it. You're kind of figuring out how to get down this staircase. So if it's not clear what the goal is, you're basically trying to move the blocks around to get to the goal, which is a throne. So I think that's the end of those. So that was just, it's just kind of like a little time lapse, so you can see kind of like the iteration over the idea in a short period of time. So I just sort of picked out a few things that I thought Phaser helped with in terms of speeding up developing the prototype. I think the API was really straightforward, so it was easy to extend, and also this worked quite well with the CopyScript. I think CopyScript's got quite a good class support, and it was quite easy to extend classes, be able to do several levels of inheritance and super on methods and things like that. So I thought that was quite good, and then the predefined lifecycle and game loop. So this was all, because it's all defined, I didn't have to go through the process of, if anyone's familiar with how the way you might do like just a canvas game, you know, set an interval and do all of that and have a game loop. I didn't have to really do any of that. I just sort of specified which methods were going to do this bit of logic, which was great because I was trying to do this quickly. And then the same, you know, asset preloading is one of these stages, very easy. And then that kind of goes into sprite sheet animations after the sprite sheet is loaded in, and you set your frames and the size and everything. It's really quick to just add lots of animations by just saying which frames they were. So that was really good because I used ASprite to just draw out the frames of my little character, and he had a few frames, he had a few animations for like the title screen and sort of his idle animation and things like that, and then going onto the throne. So this was quick for me to just get those animations in without too much faff. And then audio playback very quick, it's just sort of once the sound's loaded in, you could just call play on it. And then you can see an example of where I'd used the twins to do a really simple transform animation, which was just moving the character onto the throne. So it was all pretty straightforward. It just made everything a lot easier while I was iterating, because I didn't have to worry too much about writing loads of foundation code. It was just a case of like the logic and just experimenting. And so this kind of gives you an idea of where it went from there. So after I did the prototype, I was pretty happy with it, and it had 20 levels by the time I was finished with it, and I had a few people play them, see what they thought, and people said they quite liked it. So I decided that I'd take it to a full game. And my background being in iOS and things like that, I thought, well, I'd quite like to do an iOS game. In hindsight, maybe I should have picked Unity, because people keep asking me why isn't there an Android version. But you know, that's why I decided to do it in. So I took the prototype and I ported it over, which was actually a pretty straightforward process, actually. So the difficulty then came, well, I've got 20 levels, and they're okay, but they're not very refined. And I thought, well, that's not enough for a full game, so I need to, need to come with some more. So I set myself a goal of 54, which was 6 sets of 9, and they're sort of distributed in floors, so each floor is 9 levels. So to do that, I continued using my Phaser prototype as a level design tool, because of how fast it was iterated. Much faster for me to just change the levels, the code for the levels, and the browser refresh, and I can just test the level out, than it was to constantly recompile my native code project, my MS project. So all the levels were just 2D arrays of integers with different numbers defining which blocks, or if there was a space, or where the throne is of the character. So once you kind of got the behaviours for the blocks defined, it's quite easy to experiment. You can just start trying different things out. Some of the blocks, they were affected by gravity. The ones here are quite interesting, so that you can see there's kind of like hollow ones with a cross through them. So you can't pick those up, but they're affected by gravity. And the idea here was they kind of work like gates, just shut down. So you start getting some interesting things you can play with, and it was very quick to kind of like to just try things out and come up with these levels. And the way people keep asking me how do you do it? How do you come up with a good level design? And I don't know if it's a good way, but the way I was doing it was I kind of picked the endpoint, which is the throwing the goal. I sort of worked backwards, trial and error. I'd have an idea of what I kind of wanted to do. If I wanted to use gates, I think, well, I'm going to try and use a gate here, or I'm going to try and use these blocks that are affected by gravity to make a staircase down, or something like that. But generally, I would work, trial and error, work from the goal backwards to the start, or something like that. And again, it just made it much quicker to do it in the phaser prototype than it was to in the native project. And so, and the way that the levels were defined made it really easy to just transfer those 2D arrays over. It was very simple, but effective, I think. And then, sort of finishing the game, I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but it was a case of, polishing it. So, I don't know if you saw in the previous slide to this one, there's quite a few, it's quite small, so you probably might not be able to see it, but there's quite a few little particle animations when he moves and things like that, or the blocks drop down. And so it was a case of kind of adding polish later on. There was a full soundtrack added, cutscenes, collectibles, little element pieces that you can pick up, and I did Game Center integration because it was iOS. So I put on here the end trailer so you can see it. It's kind of so this was the announcement trailer we did. For the final game, which came out in August. So by this point, it had lots of different backgrounds on the floors, and the soundtrack was in there. I was pretty happy with it. So this came out on iOS iPhone. But it was a very short development cycle. I think in total, it was probably only about 2-3 months, which is quite quick, I think, for a game. I mean, it's not a huge game, but it's quite a lot of levels, and some of them get quite complicated as you get further on. So there's quite a bit of testing involved. But it was all kind of made possible by the fact that I'd done this prototype in the first place. I was able to then take the behaviours and the logic from that, port it straight over to my chosen final platform, but then continue iterating by using that prototype to do the level design. So I thought it might be quite an interesting thing for some people who are interested in doing games this way, doing game jams and kind of taking it to the final game. And I just sort of wanted to share my experience of it with you. So that's it really. It's sort of short and sweet.